Hello and welcome back to our discussion on distillation. What we're going to talk about now is how we can visualize the cuts that we talked about in the last module where we talked about crude distillation and drawing multiple streams from one unit or from one distillation column. So let's jump right in. Refreshing our memory on our last discussion, we finished off with a diagram that looked like this. And what this was a simplified schematic of a crude unit that represents both an atmospheric distillation column and a vacuum distillation column where we draw a number of streams. We drew a gas stream at the top, which was the lowest boiling stream drawn off that unit, followed by gasoline, which is lower boiling than diesel, which in turn is lower boiling than cat feed, which finally is lower boiling than resid. A real crude unit would have even more streams that are drawn off the unit than what we have shown here. But this is representative, and it's a good place to start. Let's talk about the cut points of these different streams. Gasoline normally boils in the 65 to 430 degrees Fahrenheit range. What that means is that if I took gasoline and I put it in a small container and I started heating it up, it would start to boil and the vapors would start to come off that when it got warm enough. That would start to happen at a very low temperature in the 65 degree Fahrenheit, maybe as high as 100 degree Fahrenheit range. I would start getting appreciable vapors coming off that gasoline, such that if I took those vapors and I cooled them with cool water, I would start to condense gasoline droplets. And that makes sense, because for anyone who's ever used a can of gasoline to fill up your lawnmower on a hot day, if you leave that can of gasoline out there in the sun on a hot day, 100-degree day, that gasoline container will puff right up, especially if it's a plastic one, and you'll be like, wow, there is a lot of pressure in that gasoline can. And that's because there's a lot of vapor pressure in gasoline, and at 100 degrees, those vapors are trying to come off that gasoline, and if we cooled them, we could condense them. If we continued to heat that container of gasoline, we would boil that gasoline off until it finally got up to about 430 degrees, when most of that gasoline would be gone. We would have boiled it away. And when we got to the last drop of gasoline in that container, the vapors coming off that gasoline would be right around 430 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, there's a video on D86 distillation that I will post in the discussion area or in the description on this video. And if you'd like to see what it's like to boil gasoline and actually measure this distillation curve, you can take a look at that video and it'll give you a little background. Diesel starts where gasoline leaves off. And so gasoline is done boiling at about 430 degrees, but diesel starts to boil at about 430 degrees Fahrenheit, and it boils all the way to about 650 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that's diesel fuel. And that's about the heaviest stream that the average consumer purchases, right? A lot of people have diesel trucks and people buy hydrocarbons that boil up to about 650 degrees. If you buy lubricating oil, you're buying material that boils a little heavier than that. But in terms of fuels, that's the material that people buy. Now, when you buy crude, there's a lot of stuff that is in that crude that boils heavier than 650 degrees. It boils heavier than diesel. And that's a problem, because people don't want to buy stuff heavier than diesel. You can't run it in your diesel engine. And so what are you going to do with it? An example of such a stream is cat feed. And cat feed starts to boil where diesel leaves off. It starts at about 650 degrees Fahrenheit, and it goes all the way to 1,050 degrees Fahrenheit, so quite hot. That material, like we talked about in the last video, is jelly at a cool day. And so if it was a 0-degree day outside and you had cat feed in a jar, you'd be like, this is pretty thick stuff. It would be a dark greenish jelly. And so we send that to another unit to get converted into gasoline and diesel, a fluid catalytic cracking unit. The next stream down, the stream that boils even higher than cat feed, is resid. And that boils at about 1,050 degrees Fahrenheit as a starting point. And what we do is it just keeps going. So we'll just call that 1050 plus. And so it starts boiling at about 1,050 degrees, and it doesn't really end, because as we get things that hot, they stop boiling, and it'll just form coke. And so that is a summary of the boiling ranges of the materials we just talked about. We can take that a little bit more, and we can draw a schematic of what that might look like, a way to think about that. And let's draw that as a barrel of oil. And I'm going to just draw a nice big old barrel right here. And we can imagine that in this barrel, all those molecules are mixed together perfectly. But let's imagine that instead of all those molecules being mixed up, that we could magically keep them separated such that the bottom was resid. And then we had cat feed. And then the next one up would be diesel. And then the next one up would be gasoline. And so this is our barrel of oil, and we just have it kind of in an imaginary way split so that we can get a feel for what it looks like. And I can draw the boiling points on this barrel. And so the gasoline starts at 65, not 66, 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And it ends at around 430. And then diesel ends at around 650. And then cat feed ends at about 1050. And so now we have a visual representation of what a barrel of crude looks like. And we cut those at these temperatures, and we made 4 cuts plus a little gas at the top. And so between 65 and 430, we drew gasoline. And between 430 and 650, we drew diesel. And then 650 to 1050, we drew cat feed. And what was left at the bottom was resid. Now let's talk about an interesting question. What would happen if, for whatever reason, I decided that I was going to change my endpoint of diesel down a little bit? And so, just for fun, let's draw a new cut point for diesel and say that we aren't going to cut all the way up to 650. We're going to move that cut point down, and it's not 650 now. Say it's 640. And so we drew a little bit less diesel. And let's talk about that. I say we drew less diesel, and the way to visualize that is you can see I was drawing that volume of diesel when I was going from 430 to 650. I'm going from 430 to 640 now, so I have less boiling range in diesel. I have less diesel. But where did that extra diesel go to? Well, that cut went into cat feed now. And so when I made that change, I have more of one stream and less of another. It has to be. It has to add up to the full barrel. And so I have more cat feed and less diesel when I made that cut point change. And so that's a start on cut points. We can talk a little bit more about that maybe in the next module, but that will get us a start on how to think about cut points on a multi-draw distillation unit. I hope that is useful and that you find that informative. Thank you.